We found a better way to do it. So a while back, somebody asked how to recreate that vocal repetition effect that you can hear in Chris Lake's track called Looking at Your Pager. Right where it goes like insanely fast and it sounds like it's almost like glitching out. So when I attempted to recreate it, I loaded the vocal sample into Ableton Sampler and then I just placed an arpeggiator before it and I automated the rate. So we get something like this. It starts out slow. And then in the fastest part, it progresses to this. So it was close, but I felt that it was a little bit shy of the Chris Lake effect. Shout out to KB for commenting on this, and he said you should try the Ableton Granulator. I didn't have the Ableton Granulator at the time. It's a free Max for Live plugin though, so you can just go to the Ableton website and download it for free. And after messing around with it for a little bit, we get something that sounds like this, which in my opinion is much closer. And I'll show you exactly how I did that. So the first thing was I just created a new MIDI channel and I dragged Granulator onto it. Then I created a MIDI clip and I drew in a note at C3 that is the entire length of the build. So it should look something like this. Next, I just grabbed the vocal sample that I wanted to repeat and it was this one. And you can just drag it directly onto the Granulator window here. Once you have that set up, it's gonna sound something like this. We're getting there. So a couple of things. Granulator looks like it has a lot of controls, but we're only going to be concerned with a couple of them. The first one is this window, and this little tinted window here is just telling us what portion of the sample is actually being repeated. And we can make this larger or smaller by automating the grain size. So I'll show you what that sounds like. You can already tell exactly where this is going. One thing that I do want to mention though, in this little grain option here, you can get to a different view where it's like filters and you can adjust the attack, decay, all that type of stuff. When you first load in your sample, I think this release is just default at 1000 milliseconds, which sounds like this. And so when you pause the track, there's a little like delay out because that release is at 1000 milliseconds. So if you don't want any of that, you can just turn it down to 0. And now when we play it and pause, it just stops. If I click on this filter icon again, we'll get back to the grain size. I started out kind of slow, like somewhere around like 1.4, something like that. And then I just listened to the Chris Lake track and I wanted to see like kind of how quickly it was speeding up and then where it really sped up quite a bit. And like, it sounds like it's kind of pitching up and like glitching out a little bit. So that like really high part's gonna be somewhere here and it does it fairly quickly. So the shape's gonna look something like this. I figured it out a little bit beforehand, so I'm just gonna copy and paste that automation. And we get something that looks like this, right? So it starts out slower. And then as we get closer to that like incredibly fast part, it starts to sound like this. But the one thing that I noticed is that when I drew in the automation for the grain, it didn't sound quite as glitchy. So what I'm going to do instead is manually draw in the grain automation as it's recording. So it's going to be something like this. I'm going to make sure like the MIDI track is armed. I want to make sure this like MIDI overdub option is on in this automation arm too. And then when I record, and then you can kind of mess around with just like finessing how you want it to sound. I hope that helps.